So to be clear, James and Mario.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
We're the two judges.
We're the app team. Yes. Okay. Oh God. Your institution should establish a system of unique biometric identification for all citizens. The first observation is biometric identification is basically the innate characteristics, the physical characteristics used to verify identification. The second observation, this is a policy round because of the word should, implies a call to action to evaluate through net benefits. I'll get to the role of that later. The third observation is the United States federal government should establish a vein recognition unique biometric identification system for all citizens. The United States federal government should establish a vein recognition unique biometric identification system for all citizens. I'll explain what this means. Vein, like your veins, like
okay.
like muscle. Yeah. Yes. Okay. First advantage is the security. What's happening right now in the status quo is that identity theft is occurring in the status quo for a lot of the current systems that we're using right now. The A argument is that 40% of consumers are targeted at any one time. The B argument is that up to 978 million people are access the United States. In the United States we're experiencing cybercrime within 2017 based on their identity. The C argument is that 41,502 data breaches were reported within 2019 so far, but the D argument is that password theft is the biggest source of fraud that accompanies complaints that happen in the United States. The two argument is that biohackers are actually able to infiltrate a lot of alternative methods such as AI, facial recognition, and automation. The links is what happens right now. We are going to be able to stop a significant amount of hacking if we were able to transition to some side of the system. The A argument is that according to Data Corporation, 15% of the mobile devices that will have biometrics from 2015 will actually increase to 60% by 2020. But if we are passing this plan, the B argument is that we are using this can be used in short of transactions, which is the #1 cause for how a lot of data breaches and how a lot of crime happens in the first place. Or we could be saving up to $33.3 billion specifically for transactions between apps, software, and payments, because that's where the largest amount of financial loss is happening right now. The C argument is that this new technology has like a liveness detection application according to the Center of ID Tech Research, which is able to prevent against hacking security measures. The second argument is that vein patterns specifically can solve. The A argument is that there are 3D images of movement of the blood flow within your actual within the actual human body that can actually be that can be like when you're looking at a specific technology, you put your hand under the technology, you can look at the blood flow, which is unique to every single individual, and that's going to be key in identifying their actual their identity. The B argument is that this prevents against tailgating, which is basically the process by which someone cannot take multiple guesses or use a pin reader or like use the same face over or a similar face over and over again to go into an area because your blood flow is very unique to you. The impacts of first of all identity theft. We're preventing IP theft. This is bad for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is key to agency. A number of people that have their identity stolen basically don't have agency over their own body. The B argument is that this is key to decreasing things like employer discrimination, especially when a large amount of people are losing like their credit access and their credit score goes down because people are manipulating their assets. But the C argument is that personal assets can lose up to $30,000 on any person. This is extremely bad for marginalized individuals who are on the brink of poverty and don't have like the credit score available. But the second argument is that this is key to decreasing the amount of cyber attacks. And you see that this is really key in terms of IP theft because a lot of individuals who have great credit scores are able to get are more vulnerable to cyber attacks, and this includes like a net loss of $440 billion annually just within like companies within the status quo. So we prevent that kind of collapse. The second advantage is about racism. What's happening right now in the status quo is that current forms of biometric technology are bad and racist. The A argument is that AI technology, according to the generator IDs the FBI currently uses, they're specific like the way that they look towards Chinese and Indian individuals only account for 3% of the image national data, even though they make up 36% of the world population. The B argument is that there's an error rate for black individuals that are 35% comparable or more likely than 0.8% for commercial trial facial recognition systems compared to white people, which means that all these recognition systems are always preferring white cis males over colored individuals, and this is really bad. But the second argument is that vein technology is not developing fast enough. You can see that the United States has not had funding that is specifically diverted over here. There's only been case studies in Germany and Japan, but the links, first of all, you can see that the vein recognition is a better technology, specifically does not link into these types of racist practices. For example, according to Bio, the digital photos are taken of the veins, which is much better than the fingerprint system, and does not actually isolate or has to discriminate against certain individuals' identity because the two people cannot have the exact same pattern of blood flow. But the B argument is that in Germany, over 250,000 trial cases were taken, and they accurately were able to access the identity without miscalculating the data or misidentifying individuals based on their race. But the second argument is that their information data is actually going to be collected. The A argument is that blood movement is key to demographic research. You can see that a lot of the cases where blood cells are, like the movement of your blood cells are actually able to identify a lot of illnesses. For example, men with African or Middle Eastern descent percent are 46 times more likely to have fatal or coronary heart disease than others, which probably means that our technology is able to increase or incentivize medical research. The impacts of first of all data collection is key for a couple of reasons. The A arguments that this is internally to disease control, which should increase by 230%, by 230 if we don't have this type of data collection for these specific individuals. So the B arguments is key to agency and key to spotlighting this type of issue, because these are the marginalized individuals that are normally not, that are normally like ignored by the state and ignored by the actual systems of power. The C arguments that reformism is specifically good for these marginalized individuals, key to finding value to life. You have a locus point from which you can rally for yourself. You have voice, you have representation. Question.
Yeah, so you say that, like, so you're going to be taking, like, blood flow images for medical research, right?
I'm saying that it can be used for it, but this is like the number one, like, it's, the way that it is being researched right now is conducive to also medical technology and also medical research. The role of the ballot is to vote for the best post-policy option. Role of the ballot is to vote for the best post-fiat policy option. The role of the ballot is to vote for the best post-fiat policy option. The interpretation, the negative may not contest the role of the ballot is to vote for the best post-fiat policy option. The reasons to prefer, the preemptive violations that, first of all, they read their own counter role of the ballot, or they contest our role of the ballot. Reasons to prefer: one is fairness. The A arguments that if they read their own role of the ballot, to remove the PMC, which, and the MG is the only construction piece we have left. The B arguments that explode around because they can pick whatever type of author they want, which basically means that we have infinite arguments that we cannot prep against. The second argument is this is key to education. The A arguments that this is key to depth. Multiple different layers of the LOC prevents engagement on any one layer. We see that the case debate is the one it creates more amounts of critical education. The B arguments that this is key to portable skills. Having this type of education is the most accessible when you are researching things online, which probably means that we can cross-apply to different types of, we can cross-apply to our own lives. The third argument is that the state is inevitable, even in systems of bartering, they're in our hierarchies, which probably means that you have to engage within the state in order to cause any types of changes. The fourth argument is you always look towards their policy they can have a policy alternative, which probably means it doesn't compete with our role of the ballot, because you can just have a policy alternative which doesn't necessarily have to comply with something critical education, which means that all your critical education arguments are non-unique. The voters, first of all, look towards fairness because it skews evaluation of the round. Second of all, the education is key to deconstruction from the inside, because you have to learn about the state in order to deconstruct. But the three arguments that this is an a priority theory shell, because this is coming before all theories in case, because like you have a chance to violate and you choose not to, which means you should drop the debater because they chose to be abusive. Oh, here's the text.
What?
Our rule, or the interpretation, actually.
Okay. The order is going to be their framework, rule of ballot thing, and then one off, and then case. Also, I'm like really sick, so you can't tell, so just clear me if I'm like not comfortable.
For sure. Just to double check. Aff framework, one off, aff case.
Yeah. I'm not ready. On the roll of ballot, I'll read a counter roll of ballot later, reasons for, but like they say that Ned can't contest their roll of ballot. This is probably really abusive. The fact that this really means that the affirmative can read any framework that they want and completely skew the negative around. It means that like we should be able to have a debate over which framework is better. We don't necessarily say that like you have to buy a framework, but like we should be able to have clash over like which type of framework is better, which is best for education and best for like making their round fair. Also, they say that they say that changing the framework would move the 1A skin explode ground. However, like however, like they can still leverage case impact, or they can still leverage like their rhetoric and their representations. Just because they can't leverage like post-fiat impacts doesn't necessarily mean that they're excluded from the round. Additionally, they say that portable skills. We're going to see that critical education is the most portable kind of education, because it's the only type of education that will actually be able to be translated into real-world activism, which means that critical education is key. Critical education is the most important type of education because it's the only one that actually have like real change in the world. They say state is inevitable. This is not true. The Zaptistas have been able to operate outside of the state apparatus for like dozens of years, which means that this is just empirically disproves this. It means that we can operate outside of the state. Okay, yeah. Also, you should, or actually, okay, never mind. Go on. Okay, next off. ballots to endorse the team with the most ethical orientation towards biopolitical control. The roll of the ballots to endorse the team with the most ethical orientation towards biopolitical control. The ace components of the transylvanian question. Can you write it? The ace components of the transylvanian questioning methodology and how the state justifies its methods to control surveillance and authority. Two is the methodology is flawless, making the methods of the 1AC are the only relevant discussion for the round US eugenics program. These were legitimated by not considering methodology policies, which means the methods of the internal linked to policy making. The third is that simulation is irrelevant. The 1AC fiat is a loser, which means that nothing happens when you vote AF, which means that you should basically disregard post fiat impacts and set a value on the pre fiat and have the actual tangible force. Plan focus debate is bad. It conditions us to ignore political subtext and influences policies. For example, seeing the political reasoning behind calling torture enhanced interrogation as a method of control. The thesis. The affirmative biopolitical project begins like a benign use of power, but this method of action creates a culture of control through surveillance and violence, like the war on terror, beginning with the Patriot Act and ending and continuing through wars that killed millions of people, which means that biopower results in endless war and constant oppression. Constant oppression and only continual resistance against instances of state biopolitical control can solve. Links. One is the apparatus of control. The affirmative justifies expansion of state control, like the war on drugs, legitimizing. Three. What does it say? 3 is strikes policy.
Yeah.
Two is normalization of authority. The affirmative. The affirmative normalizes the access of the state to all personal biometric data and laws of agency. There is biometric identification. Literally means you can't escape the state. Like wherever you go, the state will always be able to identify you because they always have your vein patterns, which means that they can always hunt you down. There's nowhere for you to escape the state. Okay. Do we still finish this one? No. Okay. Impacts. One is the value slide, continue sovereign control. Actually, wait, hold on. Go back to the links. Also, saying that we can't change the framework is also a link because it means that we can't challenge structures of power in the debate ground, which that's okay. Impacts. One is the value slide, continue sovereign control, removes value slide by reducing life into bare statistics that can be written off like collateral damage in war. It turns society itself into a space where any behavior can be registered as deviant and punished by the sovereign. Two is endless war. Individuals in the state construct things like communism, Iraq, and Iran, and terrorism and drugs to remove rights to things like the Patriot Act or kill millions of people because war and fear becomes a new normalcy that we can't that we're too scared to question or fight. Various root causes of violence. Security dilemma causes states to securitize themselves and promote strength and masculinity, but encourage escalation that causes eventual war, like in World War I. Encourages proliferation, like with Iran, that enables first strikes. The alternative. So vote next to reject the plan's instance of biopolitical control as an act of constant resistance.
We also have the text for this.
Yeah. Vote next to reject the plan's instance of biopolitical control as an act of constant resistance. The solvency. One is acts of resistance solved like SOPA blackout, stopping state policies, but state policing of the internet as a stopgap to expanding power. Acts of resistance rollback instances of state control. Two is questioning power solves like Vietnam protests questioning why the U.S. is engaged in a war led to pullout, or the U.S. decreasing drone campaigns in Pakistan as a response to international criticism, which means that questioning power would result in impacts. Third is perm fails. The ace one is the state will always co-opt movements. You'll always infiltrate from the inside. The warmth is the Black Panther Party. The Warm versus Black Panther Party was co-opted was infiltrated by the state, and because they're destroyed by the internet, these points the compassion and energy fatigue mean we can't take on everything all at once. We choose our battles, which means that we can't take on every single advocacy. These points they're epistemologically contradictory, which means that any movement that has two different parts that are epistemologically contradictory will never have any credibility, which leads to terminal non-solvency. Okay, on case. Okay. On your finished one, they see that they're able to stop hacking. However, term the biometric identification is probably puts people at even greater risk of identity theft. According to CSO, biometric identifications are easily stolen and misused to the point where Chinese hackers are able to steal millions of fingerprints and identification. It means that there's already empirical evidence that these are not secure, and which means that there's always a risk that they'll be hacked. And additionally, they talk about transactions. They talk about solving your transactions. First of all, no solvency because of online transactions, because there's people don't just have computers that can scan your arm, right? Your hand and stuff, which means that they aren't able to solve for the majority of transactions that happen over the internet. But additionally, like stores just won't implement this, which means they can't solve any transactions because it probably costs a lot of money to like implement like a scanner for your veins, which means that no stores actually implement this. Means the majority of identity theft that occurs through transactions wouldn't be able to resolve. Yeah, which means that like identity theft might be an issue, but like it's but it'll be a much bigger issue if people are able to hack biometric identification. And yeah, okay, on the advantage. First of all, they talk about how AI is racist. This is not unique. The military still uses AI, and like private sector will still use AI. They aren't able to resolve this. Like even if the government invests in vein technology, like that doesn't mean that they're going to stop investing in AI, which they're already doing in the military. Which means that like the impacts of AI being racist are still going to occur. Additionally, they talk about how like biometrics are key for like demographic research. This just means that there's more effectiveness in like gerrymandering, where people can literally like gerrymander like more specifically based on like racial lines, probably like entrenches dehumanization and entrenches like not having any agency, because like votes just literally won't matter anymore. Additionally, turn this biometrics, this will probably actually increase racism, because like if the government has a database of like every single person's biometric identification, we see that before, like in the census, like in 2015, police like asked the government for biometric like identification for like suspects, and they were granted, which is an indication that they probably will be granted after the plan also. And then they arrested people who like had similar like DNA to just like similar identification to the suspect, which to try to identify them, which means that this probably will be weaponized against minorities, meaning that they re-entrench like police brutality and racism, because the police will be able to have like a huge database of ID.
Oh wait, I can sit down. It's fine. Okay, so we're ready? The order is going to be the app with the AFC on top, and then the criticism order. What? The
framework choice.
The theory thing. And then,
K in order.
yeah. Okay, then we're ready? Extend our interpretation. There's absolutely no way they meet this. They say our interpretation is abusive because we could say the role of ballots, whatever, but specifically in our interpretation, we tell you the role of the ballots, but for the best post be a policy option, which means your one response to the interpretation simply does not apply. You can extend this. They provide no counter interpretation, which means there's absolutely no reason why you cannot just drop them on this theory shell, because they provided no reason why we should evaluate like reasonability or anything, which means that you always have to look towards AFC first. Extend on the standard level. They say you can still leverage our case and representation. The first argument here is that there's still on different layers, which still bites the argument about how there's less depth of education because we can't focus on one given layer. But the second argument here is that the entire of the PMC is post-PO, which means even if I can leverage my like the case now, we've already lost out in the PMC, which means you're always behind on the offense defense trade-off debate. But the third argument here is that your framework specifically says that we have to debate about methods, and plan focuses that, which indicates that we can't leverage the case in the first place, which means you're already indicting your own like fairness arguments. The second standard about key to education, you say K education is portable. The first argument here is that there's simply no warrant for why K education is portable. The second argument here is that it is about the process, not the product of how we get the education in the first place. It's not about the kind of education, about whether or not the process of this round was even educational in the first place. And we would argue that only the process of debating about the policy making is educational. The third argument here is that K education is always going to be bastardized in the world of the debate round, because you only have like 7 or 8 minutes to explain Foucault's entire philosophy, which is an indication that your portable education is only going to be bad education. But the fourth argument here is that K education is necessarily arbitrary and exclusionary, because no one knows what this biopolitical control even means in a world of negative, which means that you're never going to be able to reach people, which means it's not portable whatsoever. You can extend our A and B points about multiple layers and portable skills, which is key to better education. On the third standard about state inevitable, they make an argument about Zapatis. The first argument here is that the Zapatis were literally crushed by fascists in the first place, which is a word for why the state is always inevitable. You can also look towards stateless societies like indigenous groups that are always going to be
co-opted and controlled by the state, like the U.S. federal government, which is indicated by the state, will always question movement, absence, and policymaking. You can extend the fourth standard about how you can still have a policy, which means there's no actual abuse, and we're able to solve the entirety of the K on the voter level. They concede the entirety of the voter level, extend to the first argument about fairness, skews evaluation. This means fairness comes before all of your epistemological claims, all of your methodological claims, because if we can't even truth that's your affirmative, or if we can't even truth that's your negative, then we have no idea to determine the veracity of the negative, which means there's no educational process within the right, whether or not it's K education or like policymaking education. But secondarily, this means that theory should always come before the K, because our conception of the drawing in the first place is already going to be skewed. Extend the second voter about how decreases and obstructing the state in front of the inside. It's the only way we're going to be able to solve, because we've already proven that the state is inevitably going to crush the movements that are outside the state, which means we have to work within the state, which is going to be the justification for the permutation I'm going to read later on. The third argument is that you have to extend the a priori issue. They completely do not answer the a priori issue, which means you can drop them here. They had the opportunity to meet the theory shell, but they violated. We literally read preemptive violations, and they chose to violate it. That's bad. Okay, on to the first advantage of security. Extending Nietzsche's arguments about why hacking is occurring in the status quo probably needs a triad for the affirmation to the point where they do not read any warrants for why hacking is really bad. We would make the argument that hacking is necessarily an instance of other nations exerting biopolitical control over citizens. We would argue that only the affirmation plan is able to check back, because on the link level they make the argument about ID theft is still going to happen. The first argument is that their warrant for ID theft is going to be fingerprints, and we would make the argument that investing in bank technology is a trade-off from using fingerprint technology in the first place, which means we are able to resolve this issue. But the second argument here is that you can't steal people's veins, which is an indication for why we're uniquely able to resolve this issue. You can also say all of Shannon's words to show how they're empirics of success in places like Germany and Japan, which means that there's a very high probability that we're able to solve. Their next argument here is that there's online transactions, people are not going to scan their arms or whatever. The first argument here is that having a United States like mandated system is going to be able to solve this, because it's necessary to actually have the technology in order to put this in place. But the second argument here is that normal means probably means the government will subsidize it in order to make sure that it's an actual natural system. But the third argument is that innovation is already going to be able to solve. You can extend Shannon's argument about how in the status quo, without even any excess funding, it'll expand by 60% within a couple of years, which indicates that with funding, we're definitely going to be able to make up the gap. You can extend all of our impacts about ID theft and how that is the internal into things like agency, and how it allows people to actually have their own identities within the state. You can also extend our impact about cybersecurity. On the second advantage about racism, they make the argument that the private sector is going to be continuing using this because of the military. The first response here is that a government investment is still a signaling effect, because the military is literally funded by the government in the first place, which means the government, there's a necessary trade-off. Like I've already made the argument, like if the government stops funding like these bad types of AI and this bad type of facial recognition, because they're necessarily putting all their money into vein technology in the first place, which means we're probably able to stop it. The second response here is that even if the military still uses the bad technology, it doesn't matter, because it's still able to get some marginal solvency by adopting a form of biometric identification that does not depend on race in the first place. The thesis of the argument is that facial identification technology is bad because it relies on a database of resources that does not include people of color. But our argument is that vein technology is unilateral for everyone. It doesn't even take into account things like race, which is an indication why everyone is able to be included on the link level. They make an argument that more gerrymandering is going to happen. The first argument is that gerrymandering is literally the status quo. There's no articulation for how more gerrymandering can happen. But the second argument here is you have no warrant for this, so you shouldn't buy this. The third argument is that currently IDing is probably worse for race because of the fact there are always racial biases that come with things like facial recognition, but there's no racism within the veins, because specifically you can look towards our warrant for Germany and Japan about there are 250,000 people who were put in the trial, how they were able to resolve issues of racism and racial bias within AI by implementing our plan, which means they're able to solve. Next, they make this argument about the database of the police. The first argument here is that absent this, the police are always going to be defaulting to worse forms of violence. You can look towards the fact that if they're already able to request like this database from the government in the status quo, that probably means it's not unique. But the second argument here is that vein technology has specifically been used to identify things like white supremacists in the case studies in which it has happened. For example, 2018 reports showed that this technology was used to ID suspects in hate crimes to indicate we're able to check back for this thing. But the third argument here is that there's no way to weaponize, because there's no way to identify things like race with vein technology. That's the whole story of the advantage. You just concede this. On the impact level, you extend all of our impacts about disease control. This goes conceded. Okay, on framework. Oh shoot, where's the roll down? Okay, they make the argument that the role of balancing towards the team, that something orientation, biopolitical control. Okay, extend our role to balance how that is better for reasons of education and fairness. The second argument here is that there's absolutely no articulation for what it means to be oriented towards biopolitical control, which means necessarily they're always going to be co-opted by the state, because the state can say they are reorienting themselves. There's no articulation for what reorientation means. The third argument is that reorientation is always necessarily going to be exclusionary, because of the fact that not everyone can even conceptualize how things to reorient themselves to, which is probably an independent voting issue to your specific methodology that is really bad. On the specific line by line, you make the argument that you turn debate into a method argument is that if you turn debate into a debate about methodology, the state is always going to crush your movement. You cross by all my responses for how when people just sit by and criticize methodology, the state is always going to encourage the white people like the alt-right are able to take over when people just sit by and don't actually advocate for material action. Next, they make this argument about bad methodology leads to flawed policy. The first argument is that bad methodology can lead to good policy. Even if people are racist in the United States federal government, they're still able to pass Section 8 housing, which decreases housing discrimination. But the second response here is that particularism is able to help. We just need to prove that our act is good. We don't need to prove that our entire methodology is good, because our impacts are already good. Next, we make the impacts about why fiat is illusory. A couple reasons for why that's not true. The first argument is that fiat is always going to be inevitable. We imagine hypothetical worlds when you look towards your alternative, which means it's always going to happen. The second argument is that fiat is always going to be good because it allows for activism. You look towards debaters leaving debate and going towards government, which is like super good because it allows them to actually activate and pass positive. The third argument is that understanding state action able to solve. You can look towards Black Lives Matter releasing a 10-point policy platform, which indicates that you need to know how the state functions in order to actually fight the state. But next, they make this argument about plan focus is bad. I probably already answered this. Like plan focus leads to activism, etc. Okay, on the thesis level, they make this argument how we begin benignly. The first argument here is that you should value just the impact of the plan, not whether or not it begins benignly. This is not an actual link. Next, on the link level, they make this argument about the apparatus of control. The first argument is we decrease control by giving minorities agency and giving them values, like which is the crux of the argument, which means there's no actual apparatus of control. Next, they make this argument about normalizing of authority. The argument is we actually criticize current forms of authority. We criticize the way the state currently manipulates facial ID technology. We are able to check back for that, which means we're able to solve. Next, they say AFC is a link, but argument is that AFC is a necessary check. Do you actually imposing this kind of exclusionary framework that is just like the tool of the state, which is an indication that you are relinking harder to the biopower. Next, on the impact level, we make all of these arguments about value type, but we'd argue that value type claims are bad because of the fact that they take away value type from people by making sure that they can't determine it themselves, which is probably going to be another independent voting issue. All your stuff about endless war is probably going to be non-unique. Additionally, root cause claims are really bad because they're totalizing. Onto the alternative. Permutation, do the aff and the negative, do the aff and the alternative, do the first argument here is that permutation is always going to be able to solve because you're able to work within the structure and also have micropolitical action. But the second argument here is that micropolitical action is uniquely going to be super bad. It allows people to bring their own representations into structure of power, which is the reason why we end up with things like people like TERFs because they have their own conceptions of womanhood, which necessarily includes trans body. But the third argument here is that it literally relinks into neoliberalism because it depends on the individual in order to create action, which means that the state and capitalism will always question movement. The fourth response, okay, yeah, never mind. Vote.
So framework, the alt, then the links.
Alt and then.
Oh, sorry. Wait, sorry. Could you say that all again?
The alternative,
Okay.
and then starting from the top of the K down, and then the rest of the case, and then just the case.
Where's the AFC?
What? Oh, at the start of the case.
Okay, so after you finish. Okay,
Just double check. Alt, the rest of the K down, then aff framework choice, then case.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go on to the critique. First thing you can do is concede the permutation. Next, the relinks and the links. They don't say why relinks are inherently bad, which means that this cancels out. Go on to the AFC. We can concede this. Go to case. On advantage one, they make this, first, we say that this will be turned because Chinese hackers, literally just get data from, U.S. government databases. They just say, you can't steal people's veins, but that's not the argument we're making here. The argument is that when presented with, transaction, finalizing transactions, you can just use the data from the vein data that you take from government databases and just confirm the transaction. This is conceded. This means that, there's literally no solvency, and actually it makes it worse. This is a conceded term because Chinese hackers will be able to take a lot more data if you buy their argument that this form of data system is going to be a lot more widespread. This completely turns the argument they make here because this creates a security theory, which means that people will always be believing in this vein system that will always be working, but will only just increase the amount of hacking. Also, they also won't be able to solve for the later. They also won't be able to solve for the majority of online sales. They just say there's empirical success, but online sales aren't going to be able to implement this. Also, a lot of online sales don't use biometric security anyway, which means that they won't be implementing it in the future, even if innovation increases. Also, the argument isn't try or die; it's try and die because this makes identity theft a lot more likely, and also there's what is this? the database right now is in the private sector, not in government databases. The plan puts a lot of this data into government databases, which is much less secure. Also, they make this argument that innovation increases, which means that stores will implement this. This is just not true. Like, stores don't implement biometric security right now, even though there's a lot of innovation there, which means that there wouldn't be any motivation for them to do so. Also, they say that like the government would mandate these systems. You don't do that in the plan. You don't give any articulation as to why the government would do that post plan, which means that there's no reason why they would do that. They would only increase investment into these system and would probably only use it for like their own use. This means that the conceded term here means that like the impacts that you read are just replicated and marginalized people only get worse. Do you have other stuff here? No? Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah, and then like sure, yeah,
Okay, so you say that the databases are currently in the private sector, but aren't fingerprints also in the government's hands? Like,
yeah, and that's why we read the warrant about Chinese hackers taking fingerprint data away from government databases. Did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay. And then yeah, the links they agree on like tailgating and like using the same face and stuff like that. This is all just like short-circuited basically, because hackers will be able to use vein data, and because of the fact that like government cybersecurity is really bad right now. Like, Trump doesn't believe that computers can get hacked in the first place, which means that like there's absolutely no the cybersecurity in the government is really bad. They're centralizing all this vein data into the government database, which means that there's always going to be a higher risk of like the government being hacked, and there's already empirics for doing it, which means that like this would only hurt the marginalized people they're trying to help. Go on to advantage 2. They make this argument that the government is signaling right now. They're putting all the money into vein technology. That's just not true. Like, there's no articulation as to why they're putting all their money into vein technology. They would only develop it as per the plan. There's no other articulation, which means that they would still continue all their other all their departments on like AI and AI investment into the military, which means that there's absolutely no solvency, especially because like the military would be the military using racist AI would still. The military using racist AI would just would not solve for a lot of the harms they talk about. Okay, next.
Also, it's funny about the parents because so many like competing with the country.
Yeah, and also the private sector will still be investing in artificial intelligence because they're going to be competing with the government. That's like how the market competition works. What? Okay. Next, on the gerrymandering argument, they say that this is not unique because gerrymandering is happening now, but they would like literally just make it worse as the case turn. They say that the identification is there are worse forms of identification right now. That's just not true. The plan makes it much worse because it becomes more pervasive if the government has unique biometrics data on all citizens in the U.S. or just like everyone in the U.S. This would make identification much worse to the point where it's more specific. Like, their solvency works against them. Also, on the racism argument, they say that. They say that basically like they're gonna move away. So they say that this is not unique because the police departments asked for stuff like this, but the thing is they didn't get it because biometric data hasn't been developed like as far, but the plan makes it develop, which means that police departments would get this the technology that it asked for. And then they make this argument that like basically their technology identifies suspects without like that much bias of race, but that's not the argument we're making. The argument we're making is that a lot of police departments have inherent bias within the use, which means that like because of certain like biological markers in like different in people, this would basically this would like enable them to basically like commit racist acts. Yeah, because like how this biometric security or how the like vein system and basically any form of like identification works is that it like generates probabilities for like how probable someone is a certain category, which means that there's always going to be a risk that like police officers will use this data to like commit more racist acts, which means that police brutality and other stuff like that would only increase. Yeah.
Government signaling is the signaling into biometrics.
Oh, okay. And government signaling isn't signaling into vein tech. It's signaling into biometric security in general, which would only increase artificial intelligence investment because the private sector is already on that track. Which ultimately means that they both don't solve for any of the impacts they tried to, and it only makes it worse for marginalized communities and populations. What? Yeah. What do you want me to say? Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? I did. Yeah. Any speech.
Order's gonna be
I'm surprised that no
That's when
one
Sarah came in and she was like, hey, I'm gonna press start.
got it. Why didn't she just text me? I got literally nothing. Alright.
okay, but the order is gonna be an overview and then the off framework and then case. Okay. Anyone not ready? You are going to be voting for the negation because the affirmative re-entrenches all of the impacts they claim to solve for, which means that if we are able to turn case, that means you should vote no. Okay, so there's basically two ways that they can win, right? They can either win on case or they can somehow still win on their framework argument. But however, because we've conceded their framework to the roll of ballot, probably means that there's no more offense on that. Going on to case. So on advantage one, on advantage one, the most important impact you should extend here is that they make identity theft worse, right? They make identity theft worse because they transition the databases from the private sector to the government, which is much less secure, much worse cybersecurity than private businesses do, which means it's a lot easier for other actors to hack into the government database. It's empirically proven by the war we give you about how China stole fingerprint data, millions of people's fingerprint data. Which pretty much empirically proves that there will be identity theft after the plan passes. This means that they're just going to cause more people to go into poverty as a result of identity theft. But even if you don't buy that, they make identity theft to be worse, they still are able to resolve identity theft. Right? There's no solvency for this because for two reasons. The first being that, for the reason that of online transactions, they are able to resolve the majority of transactions, and also they probably can't, the majority of transactions because people don't have these scanners in their own homes, which means that since more and more people are going to transition towards online shopping, they aren't able to resolve identity theft, and also. This means that you can basically turn all of the impacts against them of decreasing agency and causing more cyber attacks, which will only get worse after the plan passes. Okay. On the second advantage, so first of all, they make racism worse, right? Because police can now weaponize, have a huge database of biometric identification to weaponize against minorities. This means that if the suspect is a minority, then they can use the database to track other people with similar vein patterns to basically arrest them, which is what happened in 2015 with fingerprint data, right? Which is the warrant that we read in the LSE about how police arrested somebody who didn't actually commit any crime simply because their fingerprint was really similar to the unidentified suspect. This means that police can weaponize this, and if the police get access to this, which we are winning that they will because the government has granted them access to biometric identification databases before, then that means that we are going to be winning that they re-entrench racism. But a second independent reason why they also re-entrench racism is because we can concede that this is government signaling, right? But it's not signaling into the vein technology. It's signaling into the biometric industry as a whole, which means that private sectors will probably turn towards AI, which is what they're already focusing on. There's no reason for them to suddenly switch, which means that this just re-entrenches the racist technology that AI is under. This means that on both advantage 1 and advantage 2, they're re-entrenching the same impact they're trying to resolve, and probably both reasons why you can vote no. Cool.
Order is going to be AFC, I want active. There are two different layers of this ticket that you can vote from. First on the AFC, the overview over here is that you can vote specifically on the violation. They are literally have violated this interpretation from the very first speech. That probably means that they have not read and meaning or extended any of the decency. They just said extend our role of the ballot that isn't conducive to, or competitive to what we have argued. You can extend our interpretation when we have articulated that our interpretation is specifically good and they concede all the framework level. You can extend specifically on the voter level that this is a priority. They had a chance to violate. They chose to violate, which probably means you can drop the debater because they had a chance to not be abusive, but they chose to, which probably means you're always going to be looking towards proven abuse. First of all, this is literally verifiable. This is not potential whatsoever. You literally saw them run a critique and run their own role of ballot, which means there's no judge intervention over here. But second of all, our interpretation was uncontested. They just said it was abusive. They just ran some offense that we've already answered. You can extend all shares defense, but secondarily, you can see that this decrease in justice intervention is the lowest amount of ink on this sheet that you can vote on, which probably means you can just vote on our interpretation being a uniquely good idea. They do not respond to any of Cher's arguments for how or why we uphold the questions of fairness in education, which means you can vote here inevitably. Yeah.
Just because they didn't contest the role of ballot in the MO does not mean they didn't contest the
Yeah, just because they didn't contest the role of the ballot in the MO does not mean that they failed to contest in the LOC. Our interpretation specifically said the negation may not contest it whatsoever. We didn't specify in the LOC, which probably means the negative as a collective whole contesting within the LOC probably means that our interpretation is still able to go through. Let's go on the first advantage about security. The overview over here. Collapsing to case terms doesn't matter if the status quo does not solve and your case terms are not terminalized. You can see here that your case terms don't outweigh our case, which probably means you cannot look for any risk of probability over here. You can always look towards default towards us on a strength of link. First of all, you can see that our strength of link is going to be greater than theirs on the empiric debate. Let's go towards China on the link level. They try to say that transactions can be stolen by China. There's a hackers that are stealing fingerprints. First of all, their warrant is literally misconstrued. They admit it's about fingerprints. It's not about vain technology. We literally specifically de-link out of this. But even if you don't buy that, you can see that China, if they are able to get this technology no matter what, it means that it's not unique to vain technology, which means that they're going to be able to get these fingerprints no matter what. We would say that vain technology specifically in separate, which probably means that we don't link into this. But second of all, you can see that our empirics are literally not going to make this happen. They try to tell you that the private sector is going to be giving it more money into AI and that there's there's not going to be enough technology to concede our warrant over here. We're winning on probability that by 2020, even without our plan, 60% of individuals are going to be using this type of biometric technology anyways, which probably means that there's going to be a wide enough magnitude and a wide enough impact for why security is going to happen wide scale, which means that there's less risk of hacking in the future. You vote for us on time frame because of the fact that there's no status quo arguments that prove why biohacking is decreasing within the status quo, which means we outweigh all of their arguments. We outweigh on all their case terms, first of all, because they do not quantify any of their arguments. Second of all their case terms are not unique anyways. But third of all, there's no link to our case terms. So you literally just look towards our impact. The only impact over here is that we are the internal link to agency, that we are decreasing just employer discrimination and personal assets. These are determinalized impacts that are never contested on the negative side, which means you can obviously vote here. But even if you don't buy the first advantage, you can still vote on the second advantage. The overview here is they don't weigh the case terms against the uniqueness of the app, which means that there's no risk of their disapp. Let's go on to the link level. They try to say there's no link to how we increase racism whatsoever. First of all, the police departments are not getting access if it's literally the blood flow. That blood flow does not equal your ethnicity. They can see that there's a no link argument over here. But second of all, this is a non-unique issue. The police department is already trying to get data of racial technology. That probably means that they can do it no matter what kind of vain technology we currently implement, which means the police are always going to be racist. No team solves for this. There's no status quo arguments for why they're able to solve only a non-unique case term, which means you obviously vote for the strength of link for the affirmative because we're the only people that are actually trying to change the way the data is literally collected so that we can and this is it's not contested on the link level about how we can use this for blood cell research, which probably means that if there's any team that's ever doing anything for racial discrimination, it is that of the affirmative because they default to the status quo. You always default to our strength of link first because there's literally no weighing that is done between how we are increasing racism versus how we have been we're trying to collect data in order to actually spotlight their issue, which means on the impact level you can vote for agency. That reformism is good. You can see that this is key to things like quality of life and spotlighting the issue because these people are literally not looked are not even calculated like vote for the app.